She found the kid clutching a designer teddy bear in a notorious subway terminal at 2 in the morning. Most people walked past. Katrina stopped. That single, exhausted decision didn't just save a lost billionaire's daughter. It bought Katrina a marriage proposal wrapped in a threat. Listen to how it happened. Neon lights flickered a harsh, buzzing crimson above the diner's exit. Katrina pushed the heavy glass door open, inhaling the stale city air like it was a luxury. It was 2:15 in the morning. Her feet throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that started in her arches and ended somewhere behind her eyes. Another double shift finished. Across town, her 5-year-old son, Toby, was asleep on a babysitter's worn-out sofa, racking up an hourly fee Katrina could not afford. She walked toward the subway station, her sneakers slapping against the concrete. She did the math in her head. Rent was due in 4 days. The electricity bill was already stained red with a final notice. If she skipped meals on Tuesday and Thursday, she could afford Toby's asthma medication. It was a miserable, grinding calculus. There was no room in her ledger for charity. Then she saw her. Down in the subterranean gloom of the station, where the air smelled of ozone and old grief, a little girl sat alone on a slatted wooden bench. She looked about 6 years old. She was swinging her legs, the heels of her pristine leather boots clicking softly against the wood. She wore a tailored wool coat that cost more than Katrina's entire apartment, though the hem was stained with something dark and sticky. Katrina stopped. She looked left. She looked right. The platform was deserted, save for a man sleeping under a newspaper 2 benches down. "Don't do it, Katrina," she muttered to herself. "Keep walking. Not your problem." She took 3 steps toward the turnstiles. She stopped again. She closed her eyes, cursing her own soft heart, and turned back. Katrina approached slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Hey there." The little girl didn't flinch. She just stared up with massive, empty blue eyes. There was no panic in her face, just a profound, chilling stillness. She held a plush bear by its throat. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" Katrina asked, dropping to a crouch so she wouldn't tower over her. Her knees popped in protest. Silence. "Are you lost?" The girl blinked. She tightened her grip on the bear. "Okay, not much of a talker, I get it." Katrina sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I'm Katrina. I have a little boy about your age. He doesn't listen to me much either. Can you tell me your name?" Nothing. Katrina checked her phone. 2:25 a.m. The next train was in 5 minutes. If she took this kid to the police, she'd be stuck at a precinct for hours. Toby would wake up confused. The babysitter would charge her for the extra time. Every logical instinct screamed at her to find a transit cop and walk away. But there were no transit cops in sight, and the shadows of the station seemed to lean in closer around the solitary child. "All right," Katrina said, standing up. "We're going to go find a police officer. You don't have to hold my hand, but I need you to stay close. Okay?" To her surprise, the little girl slid off the bench and immediately grabbed a handful of Katrina's faded denim jacket. Her small fingers locked into the fabric with a desperate iron grip. They didn't find a cop on the street. Katrina ended up walking 3 blocks out of her way to the 14th precinct. The waiting room was a masterclass in urban misery. It smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the night owls, the drunk, and the desperate waiting for their turn at the desk. Katrina approached the weary desk sergeant explained the situation, and was told to take a seat. Child services would be called. A detective would be down eventually. They sat on a hard plastic bench. An hour passed. Katrina's eyelids grew heavy. The little girl hadn't let go of her jacket. In fact, she had pressed herself into Katrina's side, her breathing evening out into the steady rhythm of sleep. Katrina looked down at the mop of blonde hair resting against her ribs. She carefully draped her arm around the child's shoulders, shielding her from the harsh glare of the room. "You're a long way from home, kid," Katrina whispered. She pulled out her phone and texted Mrs. Gable, the babysitter. "Police station. Found a lost kid. Waiting on cops. I am so sorry. We'll pay extra." Mrs. Gable replied a minute later, "Toby is fine. Be safe." Katrina leaned her head back against the cinder block wall. She was tired in her bones, the kind of tired sleep couldn't fix. She closed her eyes, just for a second. The precinct doors didn't just open. They were breached. Katrina jerked awake. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 3 men walked in. 2 were built like freight trains, their eyes scanning the room with professional paranoia. The man in the center was different. He didn't wear his wealth loudly, but it was woven into every fiber of his existence. A bespoke charcoal suit, a coat draped over his arm, dark hair, sharp jaw, and eyes like chipped flint. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion. He didn't look angry. He looked cold, calculating, desperate under a layer of absolute terrifying control. The desk sergeant stood up straighter. "Mr. Wells, we called your security firm the minute we ran her description." Abram Wells ignored the officer. His gaze swept the room and locked onto the plastic bench. He saw his daughter. He saw the exhausted woman in the cheap clothes holding her. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "Mia." The little girl woke up. She looked at the man. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for him. Instead, Mia buried her face deeper into Katrina's jacket, her small hands twisting the denim into knots. Abram stopped. A flicker of something, pain, shock, humiliation, cracked his flawless composure before it vanished behind a mask of ice. He looked at Katrina, really looked at her. He took in the dark circles under her eyes, the scuffed sneakers, the grease stain on her collar. He made an instant, brutal assessment of her net worth and her desperation. "I am Abram Wells," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, and entirely devoid of warmth. "You found my daughter." Katrina carefully untangled Mia's fingers from her jacket, gently nudging the girl toward her father. She was at the downtown transit center, sitting on a bench, nobody else around. "And you decided to bring her here," Abram stated. It wasn't a question. It sounded almost like an accusation. "Well, I wasn't going to leave her there for the rats to babysit," Katrina snapped, her exhaustion frying her filter. She stood up. Her back cracked loudly. "She didn't tell me her name. She hasn't spoken a word since I found her." "She hasn't spoken a word in 2 years, Abram said clinically. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a silver pen and a checkbook. "What is your name?" "Katrina Evans." He wrote a series of numbers with rapid, precise strokes, ripped the check from the book, and held it out. "For your time, Ms. Evans, and your discretion. The media does not need to know my security detail lost track of my daughter." Katrina looked at the slip of paper. The number had 5 zeros. It was a life-changing amount of money. It was rent for years. It was Toby's medication, New shoes. A better apartment. She looked from the check to Abram's eyes. They were dead. He was paying off a nuisance. He thought he was buying her silence, assuming she was a scavenger who had just hit the jackpot. A wave of profound, irrational anger washed over her. She was poor. She was desperate. But she wasn't a transaction. Katrina pushed his hand away. Keep it. Abram's eyebrows twitched. Excuse me? I said keep it. I didn't pick up a lost kid for a tip, Mr. Wells. I did it because I have a kid of my own, and I want someone to do the same for him. She grabbed her purse. Your daughter's safe. Go home. Fire your security team. She turned and walked away. She didn't look back at the check. She couldn't afford to, because if she did, she might cry, take it, and hate herself forever. Ms. Evans. Katrina ignored him, pushing through the heavy precinct doors out into the freezing pre-dawn air. She needed a cab. She didn't have money for a cab, but she couldn't walk anymore. Footsteps echoed behind her. Firm, measured. Ms. Evans, stop walking. Katrina whipped around. Abram Wells was standing on the precinct steps. His bodyguards were waiting by a sleek black SUV at the curb. But Abram held up a hand, keeping them back. Mia was being led into the back seat by a woman in a sharp suit. I don't want your money, Katrina said, her voice shaking with fatigue. Leave me alone. Everyone wants money, Abram said softly, stepping down onto the sidewalk. He closed the distance between them. But you refused an amount that would fundamentally change your life. That tells me two things. One, you possess a pride that exceeds your poverty. Two, you are fiercely protective of children. Are you psychoanalyzing me on the street at 3 a.m? I am assessing an asset, Abram corrected. He put his hands in his pockets. The cold wind ruffled his hair, but he didn't seem to feel it. My daughter has not attached herself to anyone since her mother passed away. She despises her nannies. She barely tolerates me. Yet she fell asleep in your arms in a public police station. She was tired. Kids get tired. I have spent millions on child psychologists, Abram continued, ignoring her. None of them could get her to make eye contact. You got her to hold your hand. He stepped closer. The scent of expensive cedar and cold rain washed over Katrina. You have a son. Katrina felt a spike of panic. How do you know that? You told me inside. You mentioned you have a kid of your own. His eyes locked onto hers. They were sharp, dissecting her. You work a blue-collar job. You are exhausted. You are struggling. I need a stable, unbribable figure in my daughter's life. Someone she responds to. Someone who won't be intimidated by me, as you so clearly demonstrated. Hire a new nanny, Katrina said, turning to leave. I don't want a nanny. Nannies can be bought off by the press. Nannies can quit. Abram's voice dropped, carrying a chilling gravity. I want a legal guardian, a fixture. Katrina froze. She looked back at him, bewildered. What are you talking about? Marry me, Ms. Evans. The words hung in the icy air. A garbage truck rumbled by on the next avenue over. Katrina stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There was no smile, no twitch. He was entirely serious. You're out of your mind, she breathed. I am a pragmatist, Abram countered. You require financial security for your son. I require a mother for my daughter. If we marry, you will have access to resources you cannot currently fathom. Your son will attend the finest schools. He will never lack for medical care, food, or shelter. In exchange, you will live in my home, act as my wife in public, and primarily, you will care for Mia. You want to buy a wife to babysit your kid. I want to secure my daughter's psychological well-being, Abram corrected smoothly. A contract. No romance. No complicated entanglements. A business arrangement that mutually benefits both our families. Katrina let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. You don't even know me. I know you refused $50,000 to maintain your dignity, Abram said. That is enough for a baseline of trust. He pulled a sleek black card from his wallet and held it out. My private line. Think about your son, Ms. Evans. Think about the life you are currently forcing him to live. It was a low blow. A precise surgical strike at her weakest point. Abram Wells didn't fight fair. He found the leverage, and he pulled it. Katrina didn't take the card. She stared at it, then at him. I'm going home, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I will have a car take you, Abram replied smoothly. He didn't seem bothered by her refusal. He knew he had planted the seed. I'll take the train, Katrina lied. She turned and walked away into the dark, her aching feet carrying her away from the man who had just offered to buy her life. But as she descended back into the subway station, the echo of his words followed her down into the dark. Think about your son. She knew, with a sinking dread in the pit of her stomach, that Abram Wells was not a man who accepted no for an answer. And she knew that her rent was still due in 4 days. Reality did not care about Katrina's pride. It cared about mathematics, and by Tuesday afternoon, Katrina's numbers had completely run out. It started with a cough, a dry rattling sound from Toby's chest that made the hair on Katrina's arms stand up. By evening, the cough had turned into a desperate wheeze. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, his small shoulders heaving, lips tinted a terrifying shade of pale blue. Katrina grabbed his rescue inhaler and pressed it to his mouth. She pushed the canister down. Nothing. The counter read 0. It was completely empty. Panic, cold and sharp, drove a spike through her ribs. She scooped her son up, ignoring the burning in her own tired muscles, and ran the 6 blocks to the free clinic. They waited 3 hours. The doctor gave Toby a nebulizer treatment, stabilizing him. But the prescription he handed Katrina afterward felt like a death sentence. Her insurance wouldn't cover a refill for another 2 weeks. Out of pocket, the medication was $240. She had $14 in her checking account. Standing in the fluorescent glare of the pharmacy aisle, listening to Toby's breathing rattle in his chest, Katrina's pride finally broke. It shattered into 1,000,000 useless pieces. Pride couldn't inflate her son's lungs. She dug frantically through her purse. Beneath crumpled receipts and loose pennies, her fingers brushed against heavy, matte cardstock. Abram's bodyguard had slipped it into her bag at the precinct. She pulled it out, a single phone number printed in silver foil. She dialed. It rang exactly once. "Mr. Wells's office," a crisp female voice answered. "I need to speak to him," Katrina said. Her voice cracked. "Tell him it's Katrina Evans." 30 minutes later, a sleek town car idled outside the pharmacy. Abram Wells sat in the back, working on a tablet. He didn't look triumphant when Katrina slid into the leather seat beside him, clutching Toby tightly to her chest. He just looked at the boy, then at the pharmacy bag in Katrina's hand, paid for entirely by his driver 3 minutes prior. "Is he stable?" Abram asked, his tone clinical but focused. "Yes," Katrina whispered, her throat tight with unshed tears. Thank you. A temporary fix. Abram set his tablet down. He didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He operated purely in the realm of solutions. My lawyer has drafted the paperwork. It outlines your allowance, the trust established for your son, and your obligations regarding Mia. If you agree, you will move into my residence tomorrow. You will quit your current employment. Your only job will be my daughter and my wife. Katrina looked down at Toby. He was asleep, finally breathing easily, his small hand gripping her shirt. She thought of the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. She thought of the empty refrigerator. She looked up at the billionaire. His eyes were unreadable, walled off behind years of corporate ruthlessness and private grief. "My son comes first," Katrina said, her voice finding its steel. "If he needs me, I go to him. I will not push him aside for your daughter or for you." "Understood," Abram agreed smoothly. "And no press," she added. "I don't want cameras in my kid's face." "The marriage will be announced via controlled press release. We will make exactly 2 public appearances a year. Otherwise, you are a ghost to the media." Abram pulled a thick manila envelope from the seat pocket and handed it to her. "Read it. Sign it. The car will pick you up at 10 tomorrow morning." Katrina took the envelope. It felt incredibly heavy. She had just sold her autonomy, her future, and her legal identity to a stranger. But as she watched Toby's chest rise and fall in a steady, healthy rhythm, she knew she would do it again in a heartbeat. Moving into the Wells estate was like stepping onto another planet. The house was a sprawling modern fortress of glass, steel, and dark wood, perched securely in a gated community overlooking the city. It was beautiful, but it felt entirely devoid of life. There were no photographs, no clutter, no noise. It was a museum built for ghosts. Mia was waiting in the grand foyer when Katrina and Toby arrived. She stood perfectly still, dressed in a stiff, uncomfortable-looking velvet dress, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked like a doll placed on a shelf. Toby, oblivious to the oppressive silence of the mansion, immediately dropped his worn canvas backpack and pointed at the massive chandelier above them. "Whoa, Mom, look! It's made of ice!" For the first time since Katrina had met her, Mia's gaze shifted. She looked at Toby. Her eyes tracked the boy's chaotic, buzzing energy. Katrina stepped forward and dropped to a crouch, leveling herself with Mia. "Hey, kiddo, remember me?" Mia didn't speak, but she took one very small, deliberate step toward Katrina. "This is Toby," Katrina said softly, gesturing to her son. "He's 5. He talks enough for both of you, so you don't have to worry about the conversation." Abram stood on the landing above, a silent observer in his own home. He watched Katrina gently bridge the gap between the 2 children. He watched her ignore the hovering, anxious nannies and the imposing architecture. He saw the exact reason he had chosen her. She wasn't intimidated by the money. She was only concerned with the people. The contract was signed. The bargain was struck. But as Abram watched Katrina guide his daughter toward the kitchen for a snack, he felt a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest. A variable he hadn't accounted for in his perfectly structured algorithm. Weeks bled into months, and the sterile environment of the Wells mansion slowly began to fracture. Katrina didn't ask for permission to change things. She simply did them. She fired the strict, terrifyingly rigid etiquette tutor Abram had hired for Mia. Instead, she bought finger paints. She bought cheap, brightly colored plastic toys that clashed violently with the minimalist decor. She let Toby and Mia build blanket forts in the formal living room using imported silk throws. Abram watched it all happen. He worked late, often returning home long after the children were asleep. But occasionally he would pause in the hallway, listening to a sound that hadn't echoed in those walls for 2 years. Laughter. It was Toby mostly, loud and boisterous. But sometimes, woven beneath it, was a softer, breathless giggle. Mia. The dynamics between Katrina and Abram remained strictly business. They spoke over morning coffee, brief, efficient exchanges about schedules, pediatrician appointments, and Toby's new preschool. Abram was unfailingly polite, a perfect provider, yet entirely distant. He was a man who had built a fortress around his heart and threw away the key the day his first wife died. Until the charity gala. It was one of the 2 mandatory appearances stipulated in their contract. Katrina wore a simple, elegant navy gown chosen by a stylist. No, Abram wore a tuxedo that looked molded to his frame. They walked into the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a sea of flashing cameras and murmuring elite. Katrina hated every second of it. She felt the evaluating stares. She heard the whispers, the nobody, the gold digger, the hired help. Midway through the evening, while Abram was cornered by a group of investors, a woman with heavily injected lips and a diamond necklace approached Katrina's table. It was Evelyn, Abram's former sister-in-law. "I must say, Abram has a fascinating sense of charity," Evelyn drawled, her voice dripping with venom. She looked Katrina up and down like a health inspector examining a rodent, taking in a stray in her baggage. "Tell me, does your little boy enjoy the handouts? It must be quite a step up from whatever gutter Abram dragged you both out of." Katrina's blood went cold. She could handle insults hurled at her. She had endured them her whole life. But Toby was off limits. Her hands balled into fists, her nails biting into her palms. She opened her mouth to tell the woman exactly where to shove her diamonds, but a hand settled heavily on her shoulder. Warm, firm, immovable. "Evelyn!" Abram's voice sliced through the hum of the ballroom like a scythe. Katrina looked up. Abram was standing right behind her. His face was a mask of absolute terrifying fury. He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden drop in temperature made the surrounding guests step back. "Abram, darling, you were just leaving," Abram interrupted smoothly. His grip on Katrina's shoulder tightened, a protective anchor. "My wife and my son are the center of my life. If you, or anyone else in this room, ever speak of them with anything less than absolute respect, I will make it my personal mission to ensure your family's holding company is bankrupt before sunrise. Do you understand me?" Evelyn turned the color of chalk. She stammered something unintelligible, turned on her heel, and fled. Abram didn't look at the staring crowd. He looked down at Katrina. The coldness in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by a fierce, burning intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "Let's go home," he said quietly. The car ride back was silent, but the air between them had fundamentally changed. It was thick, charged. The business contract sitting in a safe in Abram's office suddenly felt like a piece of fiction. When they walked through the front door, the house was dark. The babysitter had put the kids to bed. Katrina slipped her heels off, carrying them in one hand. She turned to face Abram in the dim light of the foyer. You didn't have to do that, Katrina said softly. I can fight my own battles. You shouldn't have to, Abram replied. He stepped closer. The distance between them, usually carefully maintained by mutual agreement, vanished. Not anymore. He reached out, his knuckles grazing her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her outside of a staged photo op. His hand was warm, his thumb lightly tracing the line of her jaw. Katrina's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. A small shuffling sound from the top of the stairs broke the moment. Katrina pulled back, looking up. Mia stood on the landing, clutching her stuffed bear. She looked down at them, her big blue eyes wide in the gloom. Mia? Abram asked, stepping away from Katrina, his voice dropping into a gentle register he rarely used. What are you doing up, sweetheart? Mia didn't look at her father. She looked at Katrina. She walked slowly down the sweeping staircase, her bare feet silent on the wood. She stopped right in front of Katrina and reached out, grabbing a handful of her expensive navy gown, just like she had grabbed her denim jacket months ago in the subway. Mia looked up. Her lip trembled. Mom! The word was a whisper, a tiny, fragile sound that shattered the remaining ice in the house forever. Katrina dropped her shoes. She fell to her knees, heedless of the dress, and pulled the little girl into a fierce embrace. Tears spilled over her cheeks, hot and fast. Mia buried her face in Katrina's neck, wrapping her small arms tightly around her. Abram stood frozen. He stared at his daughter, hearing the word he thought he would never hear again. He looked at Katrina, the woman he had tried to purchase, the woman who had ended up saving them all. The hollow, empty space in his chest, a void he had carried for years, suddenly flooded with a profound, terrifying warmth. He didn't consult a lawyer. He didn't run a risk assessment. Abram knelt down on the hardwood floor beside them. He wrapped his long arms around Katrina and his daughter, pulling them both against his chest. I've got you, Abram whispered into Katrina's hair, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer suppress. I've got you both. It wasn't a contract anymore. It was a promise. Opening hook. She found the kid clutching a designer teddy bear in a notorious subway terminal at 2 a.m. Most people walked past. Katrina stopped. That single exhausted decision didn't just save a lost billionaire's daughter. It bought Katrina a marriage proposal wrapped in a threat. Listen to how it happened. Did Katrina make the right choice trading her freedom to save her son? Or did she just lock herself in a gilded cage? Sometimes the coldest hearts hide the deepest pain, and sometimes a mother's love is the only thing that can melt the ice. If this story of survival, fierce love, and unexpected romance kept you hooked, hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good billionaire drama, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense stories.